Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Members of this most august House, you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little rusty. I haven't done this in about 2 years, but we'll see how this goes. What Amanda and I want to talk about tonight is why the proposal to start, for the New York City public school system to fund the Harvey Milk School is a bad idea. Now, essentially, the Harvey Milk School is a school that's existed as a private school for several years now. It's been funded by a private organization. And it had previously offered an alternative graduation program for gay students who felt they couldn't continue in their New York City public schools. Earlier this year, the New York City public school system spent over $3 million renovating the building that school is located in. And they proposed to make a part of the educational budget over the next several years funding of this school as an actual high school program, both to provide them with additional resources and to allow them to serve more students. The number of students, I believe, is going to go from something like 70 to 170 over the next 3 or 4 years. What Amanda and I are going to say on this side of the House is that the New York City public school system should not financially support the Harvey Milk School, which is a separate high school program for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning students. And we have 3 reasons why we agree with this. The first thing Amanda and I want to talk about is queer kids. And we've got a couple of things we want to talk about under this plan. The first thing that we want to talk about is the idea that there are more than 170 gay kids in the New York City public school system. We're talking about spending hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of dollars over the next few years to help only 170 of these kids. The most conservative estimates would put the number of gay students in the school system at thousands, and that's not even counting a number of kids who have problems with anti-gay discrimination regardless of their own sexual orientation. They're perceived as gay when they're not, or otherwise harassed because of their ties to the gay community. What Amanda and I would say is that there are much better ways to allocate these resources to help gay students. First of all, we think that we ought to make sure we're enforcing the rules we already have against things like beating people up. We think it would benefit everyone if we were to spend this money on things like making sure there are more guards in the hallways between classes, making sure that somebody's watching to make sure that kids aren't getting beaten up in the back rooms. What we would tell you on this side of the House is that enforcement of the current rules will benefit everyone. Sure, yeah.
But Amy, the Henry Martin Institute, the institute that's actually controlling the Harvey Milk School, has been trying for 20 years to get these enforcements to actually pass, but they have not come to fruition. So after 20 years, don't they have a right to start the school so that kids don't have to get beat up every day?
They have every right to start this school with their own money. But we're going to tell you on this side of the House that first of all, they don't have the right to use public money for it. But second of all, the reason that it's more likely these rules will be enforced now is because there's already the political clout to get this money in the first place. It's already been put in the budget. It's just a question of how it's going to be spent to try and better the lives of gay students. The second thing we would tell you on this side of the House is that the situation for the gay students who remain in public schools gets worse as the number of them becomes fewer. What we would tell you is that the perception is going to rapidly become that gay kids should all go to the Harvey Milk School, and that any kid who's left in the public school deserves to get the crap beat out of them because they shouldn't be there in the first place. What Amanda and I would tell you is that every student has a right to feel like they belong in the public school system. No, thank you, Lauren. What we would tell you is that they all have rights to feel as though they are a part of that public school system. And at the point at which straight bullies feel like their bullying has gotten these kids out of the schools, it's only going to galvanize them to beat up more kids. Because they're going to say to themselves, if beating up a kid every 5 days got half of them out, I wonder what would happen if I beat one up every day. What we would tell you on this side of the House is that making straight bullies feel like they've won is not the answer. Sure.
So you're actually going to defend the rational bully model on your side of the House, maybe?
What we're going to tell you is that the point of this school is to make life better for gay kids. You don't make life better for gay kids by telling the straight kids who beat them up that they're winning. Finally, what we would tell you is that there's less solidarity among the kids who are gay. There are fewer examples of out kids, and specifically kids who are proud of being gay, because those kids are the most likely to apply to this school in the first place. They're the most likely to have the parental support to go to this school. As more and more of them are leaving the public schools, those gay kids, and especially questioning youth who are left, have fewer role models, and we believe this makes life harder for everyone. The second thing we want to talk about is stonewalling gay rights. Because Amanda and I don't just think this is bad for students, we think it's bad for the gay rights movement in general. First of all, opening up this school and using public funds to do so reinforces the somewhat prejudiced view that gay people want special rights. Basically, what it tells people is that what the gay movement is after is, in fact, a whole bunch of money just for them to get them something that straight kids don't have. Amanda and I just simply don't think that it's a good idea to reinforce that view. But moreover, what we would tell you is that it creates a group from a very young age who resent those rights. If straight kids who are in the public school system right now see that gay kids are getting this extra money, are getting what a lot of people are going to call special rights, they're going to be less likely to vote for actual equality measures in the future because they're going to resent the attention that gay kids get at their expense. But the second thing we're going to tell you is that this uses up political capital. Politicians simply can only give the gay lobby so much without alienating the right. And what we would tell you is that they ought to focus on things that are more likely to help the entire gay community. Things like domestic partner benefits. Things like making sure the rules are enforced for all gay kids and their families. What we would tell you is that if you're going to go to politicians and ask them for something for gay people, it ought to be something that benefits all gay people, not just 170. The last thing we want to talk about is separate but equal. Obviously, what this school is going to do is it's going to take a bunch of the gay kids, separate them out from the rest of the school system, and give them something that the rest of the kids don't have access to. Now, first of all, this has been ruled illegal in the past in various court cases. Basically, you can't give some people special stuff that you don't give everyone access to with public money. But moreover, what we would tell you is that it's simply a bad idea. First of all, because it's hard to be accepted into the mainstream when you self-segregate. It's hard for gay kids for the gay movement especially, to argue that what they really want is to be just like everyone else, what they really want is to be integrated into society, when they're showing by what they're fighting for that what they actually want is to be separated. We simply don't think this is a good idea. But second of all, what we would point out is that straight people learn to accept gays by meeting them. A lot of straight people who were formerly homophobic stop being homophobic because they learn that someone they've already known and cared about is gay, or because they get to know a gay person and find out that they really aren't so different. At the point at which we're removing gay kids from the public school system, we're removing opportunities for that kind of integration and that kind of learning to take place. We think that the public school system ought to be about learning for everyone, and part of that learning is learning to be a good citizen. Part of being a good citizen is living in a world with all of the rest of your fellow Americans. And we think that when you take gay kids out of the school system, it doesn't benefit anyone. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for her eloquent remarks, and now call upon the Leader of the Opposition, Ms. Lauren Cusick, to deconstruct the government's case. Hear, hear.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank everyone for coming to this debate this evening. I want to start with a quote from an administrator of the Harvey Milk School that I think pretty much sums up the crux of this debate pretty well. She said, in an ideal world, there wouldn't be a need for a Harvey Milk School. But ladies and gentlemen, we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world where queer kids do have special needs that other kids don't have, where the interests of queer kids aren't being met in public schools, where queer kids for years and years have tried to get anti-discrimination and hate speech and bullying rules enforced against the people who are attacking them in the same ways that they're enforced against the people who are attacking other kids, and it hasn't worked. Do we think that everything they advocate on the government side of the house is good? Yeah, we think it would be great if we could have a school system that was completely integrated and completely safe. But we don't have that yet. And for the very most at-risk kids, we should do something to save them from the fate that's befallen them thus far, which is something I'm going to talk about later. But the first thing I really want to get into in this debate is the issue of special needs. Because they talk a lot over there in the anti-Harvey Milk side of the house about things like separate money and special rights and spending our money for this special group of kids. But the two biggest expenditures in any school system are special education and gifted education. Right? If you are really, developmentally disabled, or if you are really academically talented, then you get a lot more money devoted to your education than the average kid in the schools. And if they want to oppose giving money to at-risk kids who are at risk because of, their sexual orientation, then they also have to oppose, things like the GATE program that I was in school, or things like special education. Because we don't think that people with special needs deserve extra funding, then we don't think any kids with special needs deserve extra funding. What do you disagree?
The the reason that we have special education and gifted education, though, Lauren, is that they're learning different things. Can you tell me what exactly a gay math class would teach that a straight math class wouldn't?
I don't think there's anything really in a math class. I do think perhaps the Harvey Milk School teaches things like history and social studies and literature in a different way. And that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. You don't see queer issues being addressed in mainstream curriculum because you don't see the parents of non-queer children, and in many cases, the parents of queer children themselves wanting those things injected into the curriculum. And I think that's a serious problem. But the next thing I want to talk about with respect to special needs is the fact that queer kids don't just have educational needs like the needs of gifted children or the needs of special education children. It's a lot like we also devote special resources to people like pregnant teenagers or teenagers with other sorts of special interests. And I don't think that it's any different when there are a group of kids who have an identity that they think is distinct from the identity of other children in the school and who are a significant minority in the New York City schools, that we give them some sort of accommodation to them. But the second thing I want to talk about, and probably the most serious issue in this round, is safety, because I don't think it's something that's really addressed that enough. The public school system up to date has just not been protecting queer youth. 42% of queer students don't feel safe in public school. The dropout rate of queer teenagers is 3 times higher than the dropout rate for other teenagers. 40% of queer teenagers in the United States have attempted suicide at some point, a rate that's much higher than the rate for non-queer teenagers.
So of the thousands of queer kids who aren't going to get a chance to go to Harvey Milk School, do you think that they are more or less likely to have those kinds of problems if a bunch of their peers are removed?
I don't think they're any more or any less likely. And in fact, I think the fact that there's some sort of empowerment and some sort of recognition that queer students have needs might improve the situation for students in the rest of the school. I think the fact that the government is actually addressing this here and that this might improve the condition of these kids might actually create political capital for programs like this in the rest of the public schools. But I think it's also important to note that students themselves admit that they are not capable of being tolerant. 40% of students in public schools say, yeah, I'm homophobic. And that's the reason why queer students in public schools hear homophobic comments on a regular basis. Not just from their teachers, not just from people who would be called homophobic, here or in the world at large, but because this is school. These are teenagers who are being peer pressured into behaving in a certain way. When they give you all of these nonsense arguments about people who meet queer teens are going to learn to love them, remember that high school is a very strange atmosphere, and that people don't like to speak out against bullying. People don't like to say, hey, what you're doing is wrong, and that if anything, being around one homophobic kid is likely to make other kids homophobic, not being around a queer teenager is going to make someone less homophobic. But the last thing that I want to talk about independently is the idea of curriculum. Because queer children in high school need something more than just a safe environment, right? What we want to do to accommodate people is not just say, okay, here's what we're going to do for your education. Make sure that you don't get the crap kicked out of you. It's like, well, thanks. What do you want? A cookie public school system. What you want is something that actually meets the needs of queer teenagers. Now, when you talk about students of color or female students or people who were marginalized for a long time, the curriculum has adjusted to meet the needs of those students. Not nearly as much as it should have, but in a lot of ways. And I think that's really important, because you don't see that same sort of adjustment when it comes to queer students. You don't see queer literature in school. You don't actually hear discussion of Harvey Milk in history classes in normal public schools. And I think that's something that teenagers need. Teenagers need a curriculum that addresses their identity and makes them proud to be a member of a certain group. I think that's especially important with queer teenagers because at least if you're a student of color, or at least if you're a female student, there's somebody at home who's willing to give you that education if you're not getting it at school. That is simply not true for many members of the queer community. Many of these teenagers are afraid to tell their parents their identity at all, let alone ask them, who are some famous queer Americans? Who are some people who have done the things that I want to do with my life? Because they don't want to have that discussion with their parents. If I'm an African American student, I can ask my parents who some role models are. If I'm a female student, I can ask my mom who some famous women are. But queer teenagers often don't have that opportunity. Many queer teenagers don't even have a home anymore because they can't have that kind of discussion with their parents. And I think it's particularly important that we have some sort of educational environment where people feel like they're learning about the community from which they come. And it's very, very different in the case of queer teenagers. Yeah.
Since queer teenagers need their parents' permission to apply to this special school in the first place, which ones of them do you think are most likely to not be getting the education at home? The ones who will get to go there, or the ones who are going to be even more marginalized when they're left at home because their parents wouldn't let them go?
I'm not saying that the Harvey Middle School should require parental approval. I think that's a silly policy. But I don't think that is an argument against the high school as a whole. The first thing that they tell you about is queer kids themselves. And they say there are so many queer teenagers that we shouldn't save just a few. I ask you, if a boat is sinking and you can only save 10% of the people on that boat, do you just let the whole boat sink, or do you save who you can? We have been doing what we can for years and years to improve the environment for queer teenagers in this city, in this country, and it hasn't worked yet. The next thing they say is that we should allocate our resources better. I ask you, how can we allocate our resources to tell teachers not to make homophobic comments? What do? Do we bribe the teacher? Do we hand someone $20 and say, don't call that person that name? There's nothing we can do about certain aspects of an atmosphere with money. There are certain things that only cultural changes can make. The next thing they tell you is the situation for gay kids in the public schools is worse because some kids go to this school. And I ask you, is the situation for African American students at NYU worse because some African American students choose to attend Howard University? No, I think that's an independent choice that those students make that's good for their identity and what they want to do. I don't think that those students should be responsible for the situation of others, and I don't think that it makes the situation of other students worse. The next thing they talk about is the idea of stonewalling gay rights. I really don't think that this 170-student school is having much of an impact on the city as a whole. And the third thing I want to talk about is the idea of separate but equal. They say you can't give some people special stuff. I've already told you that we give special stuff to pregnant teenagers, to really smart teenagers, to developmentally disabled teenagers, to regularly physically disabled teenagers. These students have special needs, just like those other students have special needs. Straight people should learn to accept gay people, but it hasn't happened yet, not on the level that it should. We have to do what's best for these teenagers, not what's best in some sort of abstract land of theoretical tolerance. Someday we'll get there, but we're not there yet, and that's why we're not
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for her speech, and now call upon the Member of Government, Amanda Inton, to reconstruct the government side of the case.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, everyone for being here today to watch this debate, Lauren and Neil for being here to debate against us, and Amy for coming back and helping out the NYU team and sort of hopefully educating all of you. So before I get into responding to the points that we get from the side opposition, I sort of want to point out a big flaw in the philosophy that we get from our opposition, right? Because essentially Lauren gets up here and she says, look, we don't need to worry about educating the people in the schools. Our number one concern should be about taking these kids out because they're being harmed. But I'd like to ask you, what is it that causes this violence against the gay kids in the schools, right? Is it just because people don't like them? Is it because people think that they're different? Well, how are you going to stop that violence? Are you going to stop that violence by validating what the people who are committing the violence actually think? No. The way you're going to stop that violence is by saying we're not going to tolerate it. The way we're going to make a change is we're not going to separate them out and say that, look, you were right to hurt them because they don't belong here with you. The way to stop it is through education. Lauren says, well, what are you going to do with the teachers? You're going to bribe them? No. Educate the teachers. Say that they can't have this type of atmosphere in their classroom, that they shouldn't have this type of atmosphere in this classroom. We should educate the rest of the students. Taking these kids out of the school doesn't just harm them, but it also harms the kids within the school. They said there's an importance about having sort of a gay curriculum and teaching gay kids about the community where they come from. Well, isn't it also important to teach the straight kids in those schools about the gay community and about where these kids are coming from to make sure that they're more tolerant in the future? That's how you're going to stop the violence. What you're doing on their side of the house is you're just helping these 170 kids. We want to help all of the kids, not just now, but in the future, and that's not going to happen if you go with what government is telling you and opposition is telling you. If 98% of the gay kids in New York are still left in the public school, how is this seriously going to have an impact on tolerance and exposure? Oh, because now everyone's going to say, well, you're just here because you can't get into Harvey Milk, but there's a school for you. So we're going to beat you up, and hopefully you're going to get into that school next year because now we know that you don't belong here, and now we know that there's another school for you. It makes it worse for these kids because now people are going to seek them out, beat them up, and say, yes, you are different, and there's another school for people like you. You don't belong here in our school. So it is going to be worse for that 98%. So what's the first thing that Lauren talks about? She's like, look, lots of people. We have it for, kids with disabilities. We have things for, kids who are, more intelligent or show more promise than others for gifted programs. But we don't think it's the same thing here. We don't think they've shown on side opposition why there's any sort of special education that should be given to homosexual teenagers that shouldn't also be given to other teenagers. So we say, look, let's separate the black kids, because the black kids should be learning more about the civil rights era. The black kids should be learning more about, sort of about the Black Panthers and the Black Rights Movement. No, thank you, Lauren, and the rest of the black community. No, we don't take them out. We integrate that into our curriculum if we think it's important for everyone to know, not just as one specific group to know. That's really important. But the next thing that they talk about is safety. They're like, look, the public school system doesn't keep them safe. The public school system doesn't keep a lot of kids safe. The public school system doesn't keep the little nerdy kid on the chess team safe. The public school system doesn't provide any kind of safety, but that doesn't mean that we take everyone out and give them a different school, because that's not the way to solve the problem. The way to solve the problem is to fix the system, not to take kids out of the system, which will end up making it worse. No thanks, Lauren. I find it really interesting that Lauren sort of starts out her speech and says, we don't live in an ideal world, so we have to have this kind of school. But how are we going to reach that ideal world? By separating everyone out and only making things worse? And Amy and I don't think so on our side of the house. We definitely think that if you're going to reach that ideal world, the way to do it is to promote tolerance. I found it really funny when they said, look, the curriculum has changed for blacks and women, but it hasn't changed to accommodate the gay community. Well, let's think about why it is, right? How long has there been a gay rights movement? Not very long. But how often has it been? Sit down, Neil. So the gay rights movement has been around for a long time, but the black rights movement was also around for a very long time, as was the women's rights movement. But the idea of kids coming out in high school is something which is relatively new. Something that's very new to society. Even if the gay rights movement has been around, that doesn't mean that a lot of children have been coming out in high school. This is something that is a relatively new phenomenon, and one that we're just now having to deal with. They say, well, look, they've been trying to make these changes for 20 years. And Amy and I say, that's right. They've been petitioning the school board. They have the political capital now. Now the thing is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to use all the political capital and finances in ways to just help these 170 students? Or are you going to use it to help the community as a whole? Use it to make things better for everyone. We say, right now you have the political capital. You can make this change. You can demand a change in curriculum, but you don't have it if you do it just for 170 students and not for everyone. So I think that's really problematic. The next thing that they talk about, though, is the idea where okay, I'm going to go back to case. I'm sort of strange. I'm going to go back to what Amy and I talked about, because I don't think that they really respond to a lot of it. And I think a lot of the reason is because they just can't. Essentially, we talk about, what about those students that are left behind, right? What about the students who aren't part of that select 170 who don't get to Harvey Mill? I don't think they adequately address the needs of those students there, right? We say, look, you have to have your parents' approval to go to the school. Maybe they don't like that on that side of the house, but that's legally the way things work in the public education system. We say, look, even if there's only 170 kids, there's a lot of kids still left in that school. And now those kids aren't going to have people to look up to, and those people are going to be made fun of more. And they don't really address that on that side of the house. Things are going to be worse for the kids that don't get separated out. And I think that's a really big problem they don't understand.
Sure. Most of these kids are the type of kids who'll be dropping out of high school anyway. So if they're not going to get on in the public school system either way, what difference does it make?
Because if you take them out and make things worse for the kids that are still there, encouraging more of them to drop out of school, and how are you going to accommodate them? But now you don't just have 170 kids dropping out, but you have 200, 300, 400 kids dropping out, because the idea of having this other school where kids can go is making the intolerance much, much greater in the school. Because now people are saying, look, we were right to leave these kids out. They are separate. They are different. They even have their own school now, so it's okay if we don't tolerate them. You make it worse for those kids. You encourage more kids to drop out, and you can't accommodate them. That's not the way to change the system. That's not the way to make things better. The next thing we talk about is stonewalling gay rights, and they really sort of don't address this issue. We think it's very important to take the issue of gay rights and the entire gay community into account when addressing the Harvey Mill School. Why is that? These kids aren't in high school forever. When they graduate high school, they become a part of the larger gay community. They become part of the larger gay rights movement. And if what's happening within Harvey Mill School is going to harm the greater gay community and the greater gay rights movement, then they seriously have to take that into consideration. Part of education is preparing kids for the real world. How are you preparing them for the real world if you separate them and say, look, we're going to separate you here, but when you graduate, you're joining the rest of society, and in the rest of society, you don't get your separate workplace, you don't get to be separated, to not be part of society. We think that's very important. It is important to address these issues, to address the rest of the gay community, and I think that's really problematic that they don't talk about this. Because a lot of the gay community has a big problem Because what they say is, we want rights, but we want equal rights. We don't want special rights, because we're equal to you, not different than you. How are you going to promote that view if you're promoting the idea of having a special school and saying that you are different, and not that you're equal? That's going to be a big problem for the larger gay rights movement as a whole, that's trying to say, look, we don't want a special civil union, we want a marriage. We want to be equal. How are they going to promote having equal rights when they're demanding special rights for these children in the high school? That's very problematic. We say, look, there is this idea of separate but equal, right? How are you going to be accepted into the mainstream when you're self-segregating yourselves now? And and essentially, how do straight people learn to tolerate gay people? What was one of the big arguments when they were integrating schools? Is that, look, how are you supposed to stamp out racism and bigotry if you keep saying they're different and you don't expose individuals to each other? How many students come to NYU who have never met a gay person before and then meet gay people in their classes and learn about gay society and have to learn that gay people aren't any different? People who come from areas of the world, areas of the country where they don't have gay tolerance, they don't have a lot of gay students. The way you promote tolerance is by saying, look, we're going to have a class together, you're going to hear me talk, and you're going to hear that I'm just like you, I'm not different, I'm not inferior, I'm equal to you. You learn tolerance by having contact with these people. And the people who are in these schools who are not gay are not going to learn this kind of tolerance and are just going to continue promoting the violence. Amy and I feel really bad for these students who are getting beaten up. We're not going to pretend that we don't. We have compassion, we feel like it's terrible, and we think something should be done to help them. But we don't think that helping these 170 students should be done with the trade-off of harming all the rest of the gay students in schools and harming the rest of the gay society. We think we can help everyone on our side of the house. For those reasons, we're proud.
I thank the member of government for her remarks, and now call upon the very awesome Neil Vicaria to give the member of opposition speech.
Thank you very much to the very awesome Madam Speaker. Of course, to all of you for coming out here. I'm really excited to have such a large crowd. This is one of the largest crowds we've ever had for this debate, and it brings a tear to my eye. So, I think the only question that you really need to ask yourself in today's debate, to see why Lauren and I kick their ass, is to see, are other kids that are not in the Harvey Milk School, who are now in the public school system, who are gay, actually harmed? And I don't think that they are. I don't think that they're harmed because we've had this type of school out there for 20 years already, and we haven't seen kids getting harmed. We've had this school in existence, and you don't see teachers being less tolerant. You don't see more bullying. You don't see all of the shit that they talk about on that side of the house going on, even though they want you to believe that it's true. We talked to you about the fact that we don't live in an ideal world, and we thought this would be permeated throughout this debate. But the way that Amanda constructs her speech is such that she believes that we do live in some type of ideal world. That really, when you come into contact with that gay kid in your high school, and you're the only one who likes him, you're not going to be beaten up for liking him in the first place. Because that's not what happens in high schools. What happens in high schools is when you end up endearing yourself to that one gay kid, your ass is kicked just like his is. And I don't think that they can say on that side of the house that that gets changed for any reason when you allow for the Harvey Milk School to be adopted. But so when Amanda comes up here and says, and I'll take her in 1 second, is that what causes the violence, and that it's going to be validated. I don't think that this is true, though, because as I've already stated, it's been in existence for 20 years, and we haven't seen any type of violence validated. But moreover, it's this. I think what they're trying to do on that side of the house is to use gay kids as pawns for some type of greater social movement. And I have a big problem with this. I have a big problem with saying, well, you're going to stonewall the gay rights movement. Well, you're going to have a whole lot of kids harmed at the expense of these kids who are already dropped out of school, who are already at troubled teens, and are already at-risk teens. We need to help them and consider the consequences of our actions later, because if we don't, these are the kids that are going to be homeless. These are the kids who are going to be lying in some gutter. Go ahead.
Is this, in fact, a victory for the gay rights movement on your side of the house at the expense of the thousands of gay kids who will have to remain in their crummy public schools and won't get any funding for programs
This
that
is
help
really
them?
great. I don't actually think that there's some type of violation to the rights of kids who are in the public schools already. Why? Because they've been trying for 20 years to use this funding to end up to have some type of requirement for teachers to be tolerant, to have some type of anti-homophobia lesson that's never gotten passed. So when push comes to shove, and when they're wearing dire straits, I think that it's only valuable in our day and age to say, look, some kids are getting harmed. There are no violations by making sure that these kids don't get harmed. Why don't we do it? Why don't we make sure that we just spend this money so that these kids don't get harmed? Because as Lauren tells you, what are we going to do if we don't take these kids out? Are we going to tell teachers we'll pay you $20 if you tell Billy that no one's allowed to call him a faggot? No, that doesn't happen on their side of the house, and I don't think that they can defend that guarantee. But additionally, when we force this requirement on kids, when we say you are forced to go into high school until 10th grade, I think that it's problematic for the state government to be saying, well, we're forcing this requirement upon you gay teens, and you have two options. You can either get beaten up in schools, or you can drop out of schools. I think it's a good idea to give them a third alternative when they have nothing else to lose. So let's go back to what Lauren told you, because I think it's really important. She talks to you about special needs. She talks to you about the fact that, well, we give special needs to kids who are gifted, to kids who are learning disabled, and the only thing that Amanda says is, why are these kids special? What about that dork on the chess team? What about those fat kids? That dork on the chess team doesn't have a group of people who are like him that has a 40% suicide rate. Fat kids don't have a 40% suicide rate, while gay kids do. I think that makes them distinct. I think that says, hey, here's this group of people who are thoroughly discriminated against. Why don't we actually do something for them so that they don't go around killing themselves? We tell you that it's a safety concern. We tell you that students shouldn't have to worry about whether or not they're going to get beat up on by their administrators, by their teachers, or by their fellow students. And the only thing that we hear is, well, it makes kids in the public school worse. How? How the hell does it make the public school worse? Do you believe that a bully is going to be rational and be like, well, I was going to beat up this many kids today, but now because of the Harvey Milk School, I'm going to beat up 5 times that amount of kids? If any of you know what bullies are like, bullies are rational actors. They're not these people who are going to be like, oh, here's exactly what my mode of action should do. Let's wonder how rational choice theory and pluralism theory applies to bullies. Obviously not. We don't believe that, and we don't believe that there's going to be any possible harm inflicted upon these kids who are left into the public school system. If nothing else, it makes the question of gay rights more visible, and it makes the question of a group that is empowered, a group that actually has the political capital, evident to these individuals who realize that they can't just shove them around all the time. Go ahead.
You have to know that if I punch a kid today because I don't want him here, and he's gone tomorrow, that maybe if I punch more kids, they might also be gone because I don't like them. So validate what they're doing rather than educating me.
Let's clarify what the Harvey Milk School does, because I don't think that they quite understand it over there. The Harvey Milk School isn't like, hey, are you in school right now and you just kind of feel like you're getting the shit kicked out of you? Come over to our school. The Harvey Milk School says, are you an at-trouble teen? Are you an at-risk teen? Are you a homeless teen? Are you a teen that's been kicked out of your house? If so, you have a place that you can go. And I don't believe that bullies are going to be like, we can kick you any harder to get out. They're going to kick the gay kids as hard as they can, regardless of whether or not they're going to be in that school or out of that school. I think that's ridiculous. So the third argument that we make is, what about the curriculum? We tell you that, it meets the needs of gay kids. And then it's like, but what about the women's rights movement? Like, that eventually got brought up into the curriculum, and it was just a question of time. I have a couple things to say about this. The first is, I think that they're thoroughly mistaken to believe that the days since Stonewall are only a couple months away. The fact is, the gay rights movement has been going on since 1968, and even far before that. But we just don't listen to it because a lot of people have moral objections to it. People don't have religious objections to women, or fine. Crazy Southern Baptists have religious objections against women. Rational people don't have objections to women. A lot of rational people have objections to homosexuals, which causes the entrenchment of the discrimination. But furthermore, I would believe that even if you bring up this question of time, even if you say that, well, after 15 years, maybe these kids won't have any discrimination, what about those kids in those 15 years? What about those kids who are killed in the public high schools, who are thrown out of public high schools, who are forced to drop out because they don't believe that public high schools are actually safe places for them to be? We believe that those are the kids that we should be looking after, and we shouldn't be using them as any type of pawns and some type of political game, which is what they're espousing over there. So let's go back to what they initially told me. The first argument that they tell you is about queer kids. And what Amanda tells us is, what about these kids that are hurt in the public schools? I've already addressed this, but then she talks to you about, well, what about, taking them out? Again, we're not taking these kids out. These kids have made a rational choice that, look, I'm getting the shit kicked out of me. It's not going to stop. Maybe I should go somewhere else so that I don't either A, kill myself, or B, end up homeless. Maybe I should go someplace where they teach their curriculum about me, and where teachers and administrators won't look the other way when I'm getting spat upon in the hallways. Amanda tells you, well, we want these kids to become part of the gay rights movement, and we want the gay rights movement not to be stonewalled. I will tell you again, we shouldn't use these kids as pawns in the gay rights movement, making sure that later on, no thank you, that these kids are going to be somehow accepted even more. But additionally, I will tell you that this might actually actually engender leaders. This might show kids who wouldn't know what their possibilities were, who can now learn about people like Harvey Milk, can learn about the Castro district in San Francisco, can learn about what the Reagan administration did against gays. They can learn about these things and actually become the next generation of gay leaders instead of kids who are just beat upon and shat upon in the public school district. They tell you that these kids are now going to have to, they're not going to be able to demand equal rights. Equal rights are not a concession-based system. It's not like I give you something today, I can't give you it tomorrow. Equal rights are a stepping stone procedure. It's, I want this much now. Maybe I'll come back in a little while and demand this much now, and maybe in a little while after that I'll demand a little bit then. That's how the civil rights movement worked. That's how the women's rights movement worked. But we see that that can happen with the gay rights revolution as well. The final argument that they talk to you about is separate and equal. They tell you that it's special stuff to some kids, and these kids aren't going to know how to go into other schools. Do we tell kids they can't go to elite prep boarding schools because they're not going to be able to work with poor kids once they get out? We don't. We believe that we should do what we can now, and that we don't believe that these kids should be subject to the political whims of some game. For those reasons, we continue to oppose.
Hear, hear.
So, do we want to do floor speeches? No? Okay. So, I now recall the Leader of the Opposition, Miss Lauren Cusick, to give the first rebuttal speech of the round, reminding her that while new examples are always welcome, new arguments are not.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Again, everybody for coming here today. It's been a really great debate, and I hope you all enjoyed it. There are basically two groups of people that I want to talk about in my speech, because I think that this round has basically become about two groups of people. There's the group of kids who actually gets to go to the Harvey Milk School and gets to have that opportunity, and then there's sort of the queer community at large, and specifically the kids who don't get to go to this school. So I want to talk about the Harvey Milk students first, because they are the kids who get to go there. As Neil told you, and as I told you before him, these are not just your average run-of-the-mill kids. These are at-risk kids. I've already given you all the gruesome statistics about how high the dropout rates are, how high the bullying rates are, how high the suicide rates are. Now you take the group of kids, the 170 kids who are most likely to be the people who become those statistics, and you give them a safe place to go to school. These are not kids who otherwise would be leaving the forces of integration in the public school. These are kids who would otherwise be dropping out or, honestly, worse. And I think it's important that if you can save those kids, you save them. These are kids with special needs. It's true that all kids have needs of their own, and all queer kids have special needs, but these are the most at risk. That's the way they decide who goes to this school. I think it's telling that 75% of the students who go to the Harvey Milk School are either African American or Latino, the communities where it is hardest to be a queer teenager today. I think that is telling that the school actually is meeting the needs of the people who need it the most. Those are kids who are unlikely to find a support network at their home school. Those are kids who are likely to find that network here. I agree that if we could save everybody, if we could immediately find a panacea for the public school system, that we should do that. But we can't do it yet. And I think this is an important step to save the kids we can right now. The last thing that's important about the Harvey Milk kids is something that Neil told you that I think is really important, right? It's true that everybody should get an education about their queer identity and queer role models and the history that applies to their communities that doesn't get taught in public schools. But it's important that some students be taught that. The things that most queer teenagers aren't exposed to until college or later, these teenagers are going to be exposed to at a younger age. So they can begin their activism and they can begin their education much earlier in those issues and actually become leaders for a community that, as Amanda says, hasn't been activist for very long and desperately needs activist leaders to make changes. But what about the other kids? First of all, I think it's important, even if they don't get to be a part of that community due to the limited financial resources, that every queer kid sees that there are places where queer kids can go and find a welcoming and embracing community. That isn't the reality in public school, and many queer teenagers don't believe that that's a reality that faces them at all. And to see that that kind of place does exist creates hope for people who otherwise wouldn't have it. It also gives that gay community, when they leave high school, role models and leaders that otherwise would have been dropouts and attempted suicides. Moreover, I think it proves, or it just makes sure that there are more active members of the gay community in the future. If people otherwise would have become alienated from society because of too many, slams against the locker and homophobic comments, and those people now are going to succeed, that's better for the gay community, even if not everybody gets to be a part of that. But finally, I think if these people succeed, it's better for society as a whole. That's the way that you're going to get change. That's the way that you're going to get exposure to, quality gay role models. If someone who otherwise would have been a high school dropout is now a college graduate, that's what's going to make people realize that gay people can succeed, that gay people are just like everybody else, that they're not, losers or whatever else people in high school are saying about them. The gay dropout rate in regular high school is 28%. The graduation rate at the Harvey Milk School is 95%, and the college attendance rate is 60%. Could we do it for everyone? Yes. Is the political will there yet? No. But the political will will be there when there are more college-educated, gay rights-educated people who can actually make those changes. When the Henry Barnett Institute can say, look, we tried this experiment and it worked. Now give us more money so that we can help more kids. If we don't ever have a successful experiment to show the government, we're never going to get that change. If we let these people drop out of school and don't ever give them the chance to go to college, they're not going to be able to voice their opinions in the future. This is the only way to make sure that some kids succeed, that some kids have the opportunity to make these changes in the future. If we could save everybody, we would. But right now, we can't. This is the road to save everybody later, and that's why we're proud to vote.
Hear, hear. I thank the Leader of the Opposition and now recall the Prime Minister to give the final speech of the round, also reminding her that there should be no new arguments.
I'm going to get a couple of new arguments because I have to talk about a lot of the really, really crazy things that Neil said. But let's get started here. Lauren and Neil talk a lot about, on their side of the house about helping gay kids be safe and feel secure in their identities. They talk about it as though we're against that on this side of the house. But in fact, what Amanda and I want is for all kids to have that security, including the gay kids who are currently in the school system. And we want that to happen now and in the future. The only way to do that is to fix the system, not pull the kids out of it who are having the most trouble. I have 3 points I want to make. I want to talk about capital, I want to talk about intolerance, and then I want to talk about the fact that the children are our future. First, 2 kinds of capital I want to talk about, political and financial. First, we'll talk about financial, because money is fun like that. What we say on this side of the house is that you're spending too much to get too little. Yes, you're helping 170 kids, and as they point out time and time again on that side of the house, those 170 kids may well be immeasurably better off. But the question is, what happens to the kids who aren't lucky enough to get into this school? What happens to the kids whose parents won't let them get into this school? Because much as Lauren may not like it, you do in fact have to have your parents' permission to attend a public school other than the one in your district. What we would tell you on this side of the house is that the money should be used to help all kids by, first of all, enforcing the rules that we already have. If we could have spent that $3.2 million on security guards to patrol the bathrooms, to patrol the locker rooms, to make sure that bullies don't have an opportunity to beat kids up, we think that would help a lot more than 170 kids. Moreover, that financial capital could be used to get the kind of curriculum resources they seem to think are so important to gay kids. They could be used to teach all kids who Harvey Milk was and why Stonewall was important. That's what helps create a real atmosphere of tolerance. But political capital is important too. And what we tell you on this side of the house is that right now you have the political capital to do something. Essentially, the government has decided that it's gotten bad enough that it's time we do something about what's happening to these gay kids. The question now is, what should that thing be? It's ironic that on this side of the house they tell you that this should have no effect on city politics, because at the same time they recognize the difficulty that gays have had in getting political capital, and the difficulty that they've had in getting their needs met. What we tell you on this side of the house is that yes, it is in fact the case that if the gay movement goes to the city government and demands this now, if they come back in a month and say, and we'd also like domestic partner benefits, the city government is going to say to them, come back in a couple of years when nobody remembers that we've done this, because it will alienate the right if we give you too many things at once.
Hear, hear.
What we would tell you on this side of the house is that this is not what you want to be using your political capital on right now. The second thing I want to talk about is intolerance. What we tell you on this side of the house is that opening a school like this promotes the idea that gays want special rights. And yes, this school has existed for quite a long time, and it hasn't hurt the public schools so far, as Neil tells you. Well, yes, but it's existed as a private school. And what we tell you on this side of the house is that, first of all, it does in fact promote the idea that gays want special rights the first time you use public money to give them something straight kids don't have access to. But more importantly, what we tell you is that if straight people get the idea, and especially straight teenagers get the idea, that beating up gay kids means that gay kids leave the school, means that gay kids get their own school where the straight kids don't have to see them all the time, they're going to beat up more gay kids. And they're going to beat up more other kids to try and get those kids going too. We don't think that's such a good idea. We think that you shouldn't validate this kind of intolerance by telling people that if you beat people up, they'll just go away and you won't have to deal with them anymore. Amanda and I don't believe in that, and we think you need to crack down on this kind of violence, and you need to promote an atmosphere of tolerance. That takes money, and when you're spending all this money on the Harvey Milk School, there ain't going to be money left to do anything. Neil also says that rational people don't object to women's rights. That may be true, although I kind of contest that because, as much as he thinks all Southern Baptists are crazy, it's not just them. But furthermore, there were a lot of people who opposed women's rights in, say, the 1860s.
Here.
The way that we get times to change is by creating an integrated society, is by making sure that people have to get along with one another, and eventually they learn that they can. Finally, the children are our future. We think that kids need to learn to get along, both gay kids and straight kids. Lauren says that kids don't learn from meeting gay kids because peer pressure prevents them from ever becoming friends with a gay student. I contest that. I think there are a lot of people who meet their first gay person or know someone and later find out that they're gay, and it changes their opinion about the way that gay people are. It changes their opinion that gay people are different from me, that gay people deserve different treatment than I do. Basically, you need to get these kids together because getting them together is the only way to make sure that they're not going to be killing each other when they grow up because they think that they have nothing in common. Neil tells you that these kids are different and that they get ostracized in ways that other kids don't. First of all, I'd point out that there was actually a sociological study of kindergarten kids in which they said that they would rather be friends with a gay kid than with a fat kid. So maybe what we really need is special schools for fat people. But more importantly, what we would tell you, I know Lauren doesn't want to go to school with fat people, but I think she should have to anyway. What we would tell you on this side of the house is that straight kids grow up believing that gay kids are different from them. And they grow up believing that gay people are looking for these special rights. You don't want to reinforce this view. And the way to not reinforce this view is to say, look, gay people are the same as you, and they're going to go to your school, and they're going to be a part of your community, and you're just going to have to learn to live with it. And maybe if you live with it for long enough, you'll learn to like it. They say on this side of the house that people will become gay leaders by learning about Harvey Milk. We think that it's important for straight people to become leaders in the gay community as well, for them to become leaders in their own community and teach people that it's important not to hurt gay people. And the only way you're going to do that is if everyone is learning the same curriculum and the gay curriculum isn't marginalized to the Harvey Milk School. Look, on that side of the house, there's a sense of immediacy to their arguments. They want to help these 170 kids right now because they're getting beaten up, because horrible things are happening to them. Amanda and I sympathize with that view. But when they accuse us of making these gay kids pawns because we refuse to be so short-sighted, what they fail to recognize is that it's also important to make sure that in the long term, these kids aren't ostracized, to make sure that they are part of the larger community. What Amanda and I want to do is make real changes, not merely the cosmetic change of helping a few kids right now. Unfortunately, a tolerant society isn't built in a day. And what we're telling you on this side of the house is that what's best for all kids, especially gay kids in the long term, is to make sure that all kids learn to get along with one another. We proudly